The grandfather clock in the foyer of the Sinclair home didn't chime, it shuddered. It was an expensive, heavy mahogany piece that Kinsley's father, Arthur, had purchased at an estate sale to give the suburban house an air of old money permanence it didn't possess. For 24 years, Kinsley had timed her life by that shudder. Today, she was 25. She stood in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, looking at the cake she had spent 3 hours baking. It was an opera cake, 6 layers of light almond sponge cake soaked in coffee syrup, layered with French buttercream and rich chocolate ganache. It wasn't the kind of cake a family bought for a girl who didn't care about pageantry. It was the kind of cake you made for yourself when you realized that if you didn't, the day would pass with nothing sweeter than a grocery store sheet cake with your name misspelled in blue gel. "Kinsley, where did you put the lint roller?" Her mother's voice didn't enter the room, it pierced it. Eleanor Sinclair stepped into the kitchen, already a whirlwind of silk scarves and perfume that smelled faintly of expensive lilies and desperation. She didn't look at the opera cake. She didn't look at Kinsley's hair, which was pinned up to keep it out of the sugar. She looked at her own watch. "In the hall closet, second shelf," Kinsley said, her voice even. It was always even. That was her brand. "Kinsley is so grounded. Kinsley never loses her temper. Kinsley is our rock." "Thank God," Eleanor sighed, running a hand over her immaculate silver blonde bob. "Chloe's skin is acting up again, and she insists there's cat hair on the living room sofa. We can't have her breaking out before the dinner tonight." "The dinner tonight is for my birthday, Mom," Kinsley said. She didn't say it with heat. She said it like a notary public stating a date on a deed. Eleanor paused, her eyes flickering to the cake, then back to Kinsley. A small, practiced smile appeared, the one she used when she was about to ask Kinsley to move her car or lend her sister money. "Of course it is, darling. 25, a quarter of a century. It's a massive milestone. That's why we got that reservation at Le Petit Chateau. Arthur had to call 3 people from the country club just to get us the patio table." "I know, thank you. But Kinsley," Eleanor reached out, her manicured fingers resting on Kinsley's flour-dusted forearm. The touch was light, but it felt like a lead weight. "You know how Chloe gets when she feels excluded. She's been having those terrible palpitations again. The doctor says it's unspecified somatic stress. She feels like because you're achieving so much at the firm, she's being left behind." Kinsley took a slow breath through her nose. The firm was a mid-tier accounting office where Kinsley worked 60 hours a week as a junior auditor, living in a cramped studio apartment 3 miles away while saving every penny. Chloe, at 22, lived in the Sinclair basement, which had been converted into an apartment with its own entrance, funded entirely by Arthur's consulting fees. "She isn't being left behind, Mom. She didn't apply for the jobs." "Well, she's fragile, Kinsley. Not everyone has your iron constitution. You've always been our strong one. When you broke your arm in middle school, you didn't even cry until we got to the radiology department. Remember, I didn't cry because you were at Chloe's recital and told me to wait until intermission," Kinsley thought. But she didn't say it. The memory was an old tooth that only ached when the weather changed. "I remember," Kinsley said. "So just be mindful tonight," Eleanor said, already turning back toward the hallway. "Don't talk too much about the promotion. Let's keep the conversation light. Maybe ask her about her pottery class. She went once on Tuesday before the clay made her hands feel suffocated, but she bought some lovely tools." The kitchen phone rang before Kinsley could answer. It wasn't a smartphone, it was the old-fashioned landline Arthur insisted on keeping for professional reasons. Eleanor snatched it up on the second ring. "Hello. Yes, sweetheart. Oh, slow down. Breathe. Arthur, come here." The change in the house was instantaneous. It was an atmospheric drop, the kind that precedes a tornado. Within 30 seconds, Arthur Sinclair came thudding down the stairs, his tie half knotted, his face already flushing with the specific, panicked adrenaline reserved exclusively for his younger daughter. "What is it? Is it her chest? Arthur demanded, taking the phone from Eleanor. Kinsley didn't move. She stood by the island, her fingers still resting on the marble counter, watching the choreography. She had seen this dance 100 times. Chloe, Chloe, look at Dad's voice. Listen to my voice, Arthur barked into the receiver, his chest heaving as if he were the one running out of oxygen. Where are you? The boutique, the one on Grand. Did you take your oil? Don't move, don't touch anything. He hung up the phone and looked at Eleanor. She's hyperventilating in the dressing room. She says the clerk gave her a look that made her feel like she was disappearing. She tried to walk to the car but her legs went numb. Oh, my poor baby, Eleanor whispered, her hand flying to her chest. She's having an episode. Arthur, we have to go. I'm getting the keys, Arthur said. He turned toward the door, then stopped, his eyes landing on Kinsley as if he had just realized she wasn't part of the drywall. Kinsley, cancel the reservation. The kitchen went very quiet. The only sound was the refrigerator's low, rhythmic hum. The reservation is in 40 minutes, Kinsley said. They charge $50 per person for a late cancellation. Then let them charge it. Arthur snapped, his voice rising in irritation. Your sister is having a medical crisis, Kinsley. Do you honestly expect us to sit there and eat escargot while she's lying on a sidewalk downtown? She isn't on a sidewalk, Kinsley said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming very cold, very clear. She's in a dressing room at a boutique where she's likely trying on a $300 dress she expects you to buy to make her feel visible again. Eleanor gasped. Kinsley, how can you be so unfeeling? She is your sister, and it's my 25th birthday. You have a birthday every year. Arthur shouted, his face purple. He pointed a finger at her, the same finger he used when he was lecturing his staff for trying to bully a contractor. You are 25 years old. You are an adult. You have a job, you have your health, you have everything. Your sister has nothing but her anxiety and us. For once in your life, stop being so selfish and think about this family. For once in my life. The words didn't hurt. That was the strange thing. They didn't sting. They felt like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for a quarter of a century. Arthur, let's go, Eleanor urged, pulling at his arm. She's texting me. She says her fingers are turning blue. Go, Kinsley said. Arthur looked at her, his anger flickering into a brief moment of confusion at how quickly she had given in. We'll do something next week, he said, his tone shifting to that gruff, dismissive reassurance he used when he wanted to put a problem away. We'll get some takeout. You can bring that cake. Go, Kinsley repeated. They went. The front door slammed, the lock clicked, and the Mercedes roared down the driveway, leaving nothing behind but the smell of lily perfume and the heavy, suffocating silence of the house. Chapter 2. The 3-Hour Horizon. Kinsley didn't cry. She walked over to the island, took a clean knife from the block, and cut a single, neat slice of the opera cake. She put it on a small plate, took a fork, and ate it standing up. It was perfect. The espresso syrup had soaked through the sponge just enough to give it a sharp, bitter edge that cut through the sweet buttercream. She ate half of it, then set the fork down. She walked up to her old bedroom, the one she still kept a few clothes in for the rare weekends she came home to help her father with his tax returns, and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. She didn't pack everything. She packed 3 pairs of jeans, 4 flannel shirts, her work boots, her laptop, and her birth certificate, which she kept in a small tin box under her bed. Then she went down to the basement. The door to Chloe's apartment was unlocked. Kinsley walked in, her boots clicking softly on the laminate flooring Arthur had paid $4,000 to install. The room smelled of expensive vape juice and lavender linen spray. On the bed lay Chloe's iPad, still turned on. Kinsley didn't usually snoop. She didn't have the interest. But today, she picked it up. The screen was open to a group chat titled, The Real Girls. The last messages were from 20 minutes ago. Chloe, OMG, he's being so annoying about the dinner. He wants to go to that French place. I'm literally going to die if I have to watch Kinsley talk about her spreadsheets for 2 hours. Sarah, friend, just fake a panic attack lol. Works every time. Chloe. Already on it. Going to the boutique on Grand. I'll tell mom my arms are numb. Dad will probably buy me that leather jacket I wanted from the window to calm my nerves. BRB. Kinsley looked at the screen for a long time. She didn't feel angry. She felt a strange, light buoyancy, like a swimmer who had finally stopped trying to carry a lead weight to the surface and simply let go of it. She took a picture of the screen with her phone. Then she set the iPad back down on the pillow, exactly where she had found it. She walked back upstairs, took her purse, her car keys, and the folder containing her latest bank statement. She had $42,000 saved, the result of 5 years of living on beans and rice and working every Saturday, and walked out the front door. She didn't lock it. It wasn't her house. Her car was a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger side door from when Chloe had backed her scooter into it and Arthur had refused to pay for the repair because it's just cosmetic, Kins, and Chloe feels terrible. The engine started with a familiar, metallic growl. She didn't drive toward her apartment. She turned the wheel north, toward the state line. 3 hours away, where the suburbs gave way to rolling hills and then to the jagged, scrub-covered limestone of the high country, lay Blue Thistle Ranch. It belonged to her maternal grandfather, Logan Vance. Logan was Eleanor's father, but they hadn't spoken in 15 years. Eleanor called him a stubborn, primitive old man who chose dirt over dignity. Arthur called him a bad investment. Kinsley called him Papa. He was 78 years old, his knees were gone, his wife had died a decade ago, and his ranch, once a proud 150-acre breeding facility for quarter horses, was dying with him. Every month, he sent Kinsley a short, handwritten letter that smelled of tobacco and cedar, containing nothing but news about the weather, the health of his last 3 senior mares, and a single line at the end, "The gate's unlatched, kid." The sun was setting by the time the Honda cleared the mountain pass. The sky wasn't blue anymore, it was a bruised, magnificent purple, split by streaks of orange that looked like open furnace doors. Kinsley turned off the highway onto Route 9, a 2-lane strip of asphalt that had more potholes than paint. The car rattled, its small tires groaning as she climbed the gravel driveway that led to the ranch. The sign above the entrance, 2 rusted iron horseshoes welded to a crossbeam, hung at an angle. The wood was grayed by decades of wind and sun. The pastures on either side were overgrown with thistle and yellow mustard weed, the fences sagging like old clotheslines. In the driveway sat an ancient Ford F-250, its blue paint oxidized into a dull, chalky film. Kinsley parked the Honda next to it. When she turned off the ignition, the silence of the high country hit her like a physical blow. There were no sirens, no lawnmowers, no voices arguing through drywall. Just the wind in the pine trees and the dry, sweet smell of alfalfa and manure. The screen door of the small, single-story ranch house creaked open. Logan Vance stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing an old flannel shirt that looked like it had been washed 1,000 times, a grease-stained John Deere cap, and jeans held up by a wide leather belt with a tarnished silver buckle. He was leaning heavily on a cane made from a hickory branch, his shoulders hunched, but his eyes, the same sharp, pale gray as Kinsley's, were bright under his bushy white brows. He didn't ask what she was doing there. He didn't ask why she had a duffel bag or why her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in a week. He looked at the Honda, then at her. "You're late for supper," he said, his voice like gravel being turned over with a shovel. "I made chili. It's been on the stove since noon. Probably tastes like boot leather by now." Kinsley walked up the porch steps. Her legs felt stiff, her back ached from the drive, and her 25th birthday was almost over. "I don't mind boot leather, Papa," she said. Logan looked at her for a long second, then reached out with his free hand and patted her shoulder. His palm was hard, covered in thick, yellowed calluses that had spent 50 years holding ropes and reins. It was the heaviest, most secure thing she had felt in her entire life. "Come on and out of the wind," he said. Chapter 3. The Cold Kitchen. The inside of the house was frozen in 1994. The wallpaper in the kitchen had a pattern of small, faded geese wearing blue ribbons around their necks. The linoleum underfoot was worn down to the gray backing in front of the sink and the stove. Logan didn't move fast. Every step with the cane was a small, deliberate negotiation with his hips. He set a bowl of thick, dark chili in front of her, along with a piece of cornbread that could have been used as a doorstop. "Your mother called," Logan said, sitting down across from her. He didn't eat. He just watched her with that quiet, predatory stillness old cattlemen have. Kinsley paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "When?" "About an hour ago. Said you walked out of the house like a thief in the night. Said you left a perfectly good cake on the counter and didn't lock the back door." "Did she ask if I was here?" "Nope," Logan said, reaching into his shirt pocket for a pouch of loose tobacco. "She asked if I'd seen your car. Said your father was worried you'd do something dramatic to get attention because Chloe had a medical emergency." Kinsley let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. "A medical emergency? Did she tell you what it was?" "Something about her breathing. Sounds to me like that girl needs to spend a week behind a plow. Clear out her lungs." He rolled a cigarette with one hand, a skill he'd kept long after his fingers began to twist with arthritis. He didn't light it, he just kept it unlit between his lips, a habit. From when his wife, Martha, had banned smoking in the house 20 years ago. "I told Eleanor I hadn't seen you. Told her if you had any sense, you'd be halfway to Canada." "I'm not going to Canada, Papa." "Good. The fishing's better here anyway." He leaned back, the old wooden chair groaning under his weight. "You look like hell, Kinsley." "I'm 25 today. I know what day it is. I got a calendar." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife. It was an old case knife with a bone handle, worn smooth by decades of friction against denim. He laid it on the table between them. "Your grandmother bought me that when I turned 25. Said if a man hasn't found something worth keeping by then, he's not looking hard enough. It's yours now." Kinsley reached out and picked up the knife. It was heavy, grease-scented, and warm from his pocket. It didn't look like an opera cake, and it didn't look like a country club dinner. It looked like survival. "Thank you," she whispered. "What are you going to do about that office job?" "I'm going to call them on Monday and tell them I'm taking my accrued vacation," Kinsley said. "And then I'm going to quit." Logan's eyebrows moved up a fraction of an inch. "You got money. Enough for a year. If I'm careful." "You've always been careful. Too careful." He stood up, his knee giving a loud, wet pop that made him grimace. "The roof on the north barn is leaking. The wind took 3 sheets of tin off it last month. The tractor needs a new fuel pump, and the black mare, Sadie, has a hoof abscess that needs soaking twice a day. I can't get down on the ground to do it." He walked toward the hallway, his cane thudding rhythmically against the floor. At the door, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "The small bedroom at the end of the hall has clean sheets. They're old, but they're dry. We start at 5. 5, Kinsley agreed. When he was gone, Kinsley sat in the quiet kitchen for another hour. She didn't look at her phone, though it vibrated twice in her purse, once from her mother, once from a number she didn't recognize. She took the phone out, turned it off, and put it in the back of a kitchen drawer behind a stack of rusted cookie cutters. She slept that night under 3 heavy woolen blankets that smelled of cedar and old wool. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't dream about numbers that wouldn't balance. Act 2. The Resurrection of Blue Thistle. Chapter 4. The First Year's Mud. The mud of the high country wasn't like suburban mud. It wasn't a neat, black soil that washed off a driveway with a garden hose. It was a thick, gray, limestone-heavy clay that clung to boots like wet cement and turned to concrete when it dried. By November, Kinsley's hands didn't look like an accountant's anymore. The skin across her knuckles was split and calloused, the nails trimmed short and often stained with horse ointment or grease. "You're holding that shovel like a pencil," Logan barked from his seat on an upturned milk crate in the middle of the main barn. He couldn't do much manual labor now. His right hip had locked up entirely with the first frost, but his voice remained fully functional. "Get your weight over the blade." Use your legs, not your back. You keep using your back like that, you'll be walking like me by Christmas. Kinsley wiped her brow with the back of her sleeve, leaving a streak of gray muck across her forehead. She was clearing out the middle stall of the old breeding barn. It hadn't been used in 5 years, and the bedding had rotted into a dense, ammoniacal compost that made her eyes water. The tractor would be faster, she gasped, leaning on the handle for a brief second. Tractors got no hydraulic fluid because the seal's blown, Logan retorted. And, hydraulic fluid costs $40 a bucket. Shovels are free. She didn't argue. She drove the spade back into the dirt. The first 6 months had been a lesson in triage. The ranch wasn't just old, it was actively dissolving. The fences were the worst part. Every afternoon, after she finished the barn chores and fed the 3 remaining mares, Sadie, Gypsy, and an old, half-blind Appaloosa named Dot, she would load the back of the Ford with a post-hole digger, a bucket of rusted fencing staples, and a roll of barbed wire. She learned how to stretch wire using a come-along hitch to the truck's bumper. She learned the specific, sharp pain of a rusty barb slicing through a leather glove. She learned how to find the property line by looking for the old stone cairns Logan's father had piled up in the 1940s. On a Tuesday in late November, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. A gray, heavy sleet began to fall, turning the gravel driveway into a sheet of ice. Kinsley was out in the north pasture, trying to pull a rotten cedar post from the frozen ground, when she heard the rumble of a heavy engine. She stood up, her breath coming in white plumes, her hands numb inside her wet gloves. A brand new, silver Dodge Ram 3500 dually was coming up the driveway, its tires chewing through the sleet with effortless power. It was pulling a 24-foot, enclosed aluminum horse trailer that looked like it cost more than Kinsley's entire life savings. The truck stopped near the house, and a man got out. He was in his late 20s, tall, with broad shoulders hidden under a heavy brown canvas coat with a sheepskin collar. He wore a clean, dark gray cowboy hat and boots that hadn't seen mud today. He walked toward her, his stride long and easy, despite the ice. "You Logan Vance's girl?" he asked. His voice was deep, slow, with the dry, flat cadence of the mountain country. "I'm Kinsley," she said, her voice tight from the cold. "His granddaughter." "Who are you?" "Wade Miller," he said, stopping a few feet away. He had a square jaw, a few days of dark stubble, and eyes that were the color of river rocks, cool and green-gray. He looked at the post-hole digger in her hand, then at the sagging fence line. "Your granddad called my old man last week. Said he had some pasture he wanted to lease out for winter grazing if we were short on hay." Kinsley stared at him. Logan hadn't said a word to her about leasing pasture. "We don't have pasture," Kinsley said shortly. "As you can see, the fences are down." "Some of them are," Wade said, looking along the ridge. "But the bottom 40 looks all right. The grass there is deep under the brush. My family runs the outfit 3 miles north, the Cross M. We got 30 yearling steers that need a place to sit until February so we don't eat into our mountain hay." Logan's cane thudded onto the porch of the house. The old man had come out without his coat, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the sleet. "Miller," Logan shouted, "get your ass in out of the wet. Bring the girl with you." Chapter 5. The Ledger and the Lease. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Wade Miller sat at the table, his large frame making the old wooden chair look like a toy. He had taken off his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that was cropped short at the sides. Kinsley stood by the stove, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot water just to thaw her fingers. She was furious, though her face showed nothing but her usual cold composure. $10 a head per month, Logan said, leaning his forearms on the table. "That's $300 a month, Miller. Plus, your boys do the fence maintenance on the east side." $8, Wade said calmly. "And we'll supply the wire, but your girl here helps stretch it. My riders are busy with the calving down on the river bottoms." "9, Logan countered. "And she only helps on the weekends. She's busy with the barns during the week." Wade looked at Kinsley. His eyes weren't dismissive, they were calculating. He was measuring her the way a horseman measures a colt, looking at the bone, the muscle, the way she held herself under pressure. 9 works, Wade said. But I want it in writing. My dad doesn't do handshakes with the Vance family anymore. Not since 20 years ago. Logan's face darkened, the red veins in his cheeks turning purple. Your dad was a stubborn mule, Wade. Still is. He's alive, Wade said simply. Which is more than we can say for most of the outfits around here. He pulled a small, clean ledger from his coat pocket and a pen. He didn't write like a cowboy, he wrote with a neat, swift hand that Kinsley recognized instantly as professional. Give me that, Kinsley said, stepping forward. She took the ledger from his hand before he could start writing. Wade looked up, surprised. Kinsley looked at the page. If you're leasing 90 acres of the bottom 40 and the middle ridge, you need a clause for liability. If one of your steers breaks a leg in an old gopher hole, that's on you, not us. And we want 50% of the lease up front, cash or certified check. No payment on delivery. Wade stared at her for 3 seconds. A slow, very small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You're Arthur Sinclair's daughter, aren't you? The name felt like a bucket of cold water. I'm Kinsley Sinclair, she said. My father has nothing to do with this ranch. I know who he is, Wade said, leaning back. He came up here 5 years ago trying to buy the water rights off the creek for some developer from the city. My dad told him if he saw his car on Route 9 again, he'd use it for target practice. He's an accountant, Kinsley said. He doesn't understand water rights. He understands money, Wade said. But he didn't understand Logan. He took the ledger back and wrote the liability clause exactly as Kinsley had dictated it. $135 up front. I'll bring the check tomorrow when we drop the first load of steers. He stood up, put his hat back on, and nodded to Logan. Logan. Then he looked at Kinsley. See you tomorrow, accountant. When the screen door shut and the big Dodge had rumbled back down the driveway, Kinsley turned on her grandfather. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have told me we couldn't do it, Logan said, not looking at her as he reached for his unlit cigarette. You're too busy looking at what we don't have, Kins. Sometimes you gotta look at what someone else needs and exploit it. The fence on the east side is completely gone, Papa. If those steers get into the willow brush by the creek, they'll get foot rot. Then you better get up early tomorrow and help him fix it, Logan said, his voice softening just enough for her to hear the exhaustion behind it. We need that money, girl. The feed store down in town told me last week they aren't carrying my bill past the first of the year. If we don't pay him $400 by January, Sadie doesn't get her grain. Kinsley went to the drawer where she had put her phone 6 months ago. She pulled it out, plugged it into the old charger she'd found, and waited for it to clear its screen. There were 84 missed calls. 42 texts from Eleanor. 12 from Arthur. None from Chloe. The last text from Arthur was from 3 weeks ago. Kinsley, your mother is sick with worry. This tantrum has gone on long enough. You left your apartment lease to expire and the landlord called us about your deposit. We have your things in storage. Contact us immediately or we are coming up there to get you. Kinsley didn't reply. She opened her banking app. Her balance was $38,000. She had spent $4,000 on lumber, veterinary supplies, and groceries over the summer. She transferred $400 to the Logan feed store account online. Then she texted the feed store manager, account settled. Please send the usual delivery for Logan Vance on Friday, Kinsley Sinclair. She turned the phone off and put it back in the drawer. Chapter 6. The Blood in the Frost. The winter of 2027 was the coldest the valley had seen in 30 years. By January, the thermometer outside the kitchen window didn't rise above 10 degrees for 3 weeks. The ground was frozen 3 feet deep, making it impossible to dig, bury, or repair anything. The Cross-M steers were tough, but the cold was cruel. One morning, Kinsley found Wade Miller already in the bottom pasture, his horse's breath freezing into long silver icicles on its bit. He was on his knees in the snow next to a yearling that was shivering violently, its eyes glazed over. Kinsley walked down from the barn, her face wrapped in a wool scarf until only her eyes showed. She was carrying a bucket of hot molasses water. "It's pneumonia," Wade said without looking up. He was rubbing the calf's ribs with his gloved hands, his movements fast and rhythmic. "She got down in the draw last night during the wind. The snow drifted over her." Kinsley knelt down opposite him. The cold from the ground went through her double-layered jeans instantly, biting into her kneecaps. She held the bucket near the calf's nose. The sweet, dark steam rose into the freezing air. "We need to get her into the old breeding barn," Kinsley said. "She's 400 pounds, Wade said, his voice rough. "My horse can't drag her up that ridge without breaking her leg on the rocks under the snow. And the truck can't clear the drift by the gate. Then we carry her," Kinsley said. Wade looked at her through the frost on his eyelashes. "You're crazy. You're 5 foot nothing. I'm 5'6", she said, "and I've been hauling 80-pound hay bales up that ladder for 4 months. Get her front, I've got her back." It took them 40 minutes to move the calf 300 yards. It wasn't an alpine rescue, it was a miserable, grunting, slipping agony. Twice Kinsley went down on her knees, the calf's heavy, wet flank pinning her into the snow, but she didn't let go of the hind legs. She could hear Wade swearing under his breath, his boots throwing up chunks of frozen turf. When they finally dropped the yearling onto the thick straw in the middle stall of the barn, Kinsley collapsed against the wooden wall, her chest heaving, her throat burning from the dry, sub-zero air. Wade stood over the calf, his hands on his hips, his breath coming in loud, ragged gasps. He looked down at Kinsley. Her scarf had slipped, her face was bright red from exertion, her hair a wild, static mass of dark brown curls around her head. There was a smear of dried calf blood on her chin from where the animal's head had thrashed against her. Wade reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean white handkerchief, and knelt down in front of her. He didn't ask permission. He reached out and wiped the blood from her chin with a surprisingly gentle touch. "You don't quit, do you?" he asked. "Quitting is expensive," Kinsley said, her voice hoarse. "I don't like losing investments." "That's not an accountant talking," Wade said, his eyes staying on hers for a beat too long. "That's a rancher." He stood up and walked over to the horse stall where old Sadie was watching them, her ears forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an apple he'd brought from his own lunch, slicing it with his knife and offering a piece to the mare on his open palm. "My dad told me yesterday that your father called him again," Wade said, his back to her. Kinsley's muscles went stiff under her coat. What did he want? Wanted to know if the Cross M was interested in making a joint offer on this place. Said he had power of attorney for your mother, and they were looking to settle Logan's affairs before he declined further. Kinsley stood up, her hand automatically going to the bone-handled case knife in her pocket. "Logan isn't declining. He's just old." "I know," Wade said, turning around. "My dad told him to go pound sand. But your father's persistent, Kinsley. He's got some big money behind him from a resort group out of Denver. They want this whole valley for a golf course and guest ranches for tech executives. They won't get it. Logan's taxes are 3 years behind," Wade said quietly. The silence that followed was different from the cold. It was the silence of a trap closing. Kinsley looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Public record," Wade said. "The county publishes the delinquent list every December in the local paper. Logan's name was at the top of the page. $3,412. If it isn't paid by this June, the county puts the tax lien up for auction on the courthouse steps." He walked toward the barn door, stopping to look back at her against the white glare of the snow outside. "My dad won't buy it out from under him," Wade said. "But your father will. He's just waiting for the date." Act 3. The Document and the Deepening Soil. Chapter 7. The Audit of Blue Thistle. That night, while Logan slept his heavy, rattling sleep in the back room, Kinsley did what she had been trained to do. She conducted an audit. She went into Logan's small office, a room that smelled of old leather and mouse droppings, where a single green-shaded banker's lamp sat on an oak roll-top desk. The desk was stuffed with 15 years of unopened mail, circulars from the feed store, and veterinary bills written on the backs of envelopes. She sorted them into 3 piles: immediate, delinquent, and trash. By 3 in the morning, the truth was laid out on the green felt blotting pad under the lamp. It was uglier than she had imagined. Logan didn't just owe the county $3,000. He owed the state $5,000 in unpaid agricultural use penalties because he hadn't filled out the annual land use verification forms since Martha died. He had a line of credit at the bank that had been frozen at $10,000, with the interest compounding every month. The total debt was $18,642. If she used her savings, she could pay it all tomorrow. She would have $20,000 left, enough to keep the ranch running for another year, buy the seed for the spring hay crop, and replace the hydraulic seals on the tractor. But it wouldn't fix the underlying problem. The ranch didn't produce enough income to cover its own electricity. She sat back in the swivel chair, her fingers tapping against her teeth. It was the same gesture she used when she found a discrepancy in a corporate balance sheet. Why was Arthur so interested in this specific dirt? The Cross M had thousands of acres of better grass 3 miles north. The valley wasn't on a major highway. A resort group from Denver wouldn't buy 150 acres of thistle and limestone unless there was something else. She stood up, took the old flashlight from the desk, and went out to the kitchen. She pulled the drawer open, took out her phone, and turned it on. She didn't look at the texts from her family. She opened a browser and went to the State Department of Natural Resources database. It took her an hour to find the Geological Survey maps for Route 9 from 2024. When the map loaded on her small screen, she zoomed in on the blue thistle boundaries. There was a blue line running through the eastern ridge, the one Wade's steers were grazing on. It wasn't a creek, it was an underground aquifer, a deep limestone cavern system that carried pure, glacial runoff from the high peaks down to the valley floor. In 2025, the state legislature had passed the Clean Water Protection Act, which gave massive tax incentives and commercial bottling rights to private landowners who controlled certified premium aquifers. The Blue Thistle Aquifer was rated Class AAA. The land wasn't worth $50,000 as a horse ranch. It was worth $3 million as a water source. And Arthur knew it. He had been tracking it from his office 3 hours away, waiting for Logan to die or the county to seize the land for $3,000 in back taxes so he could buy the lien and foreclose before anyone else noticed the blue line on the geological map. Kinsley leaned her head back against the kitchen cabinets and laughed. It was a long, low sound that turned into a sigh. "You old fox," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking about her father or her grandfather. Chapter 8. The Grandfather's Right. The next morning, Kinsley didn't go to the barns. She sat across from Logan at the breakfast table, the geological map printed out on 4 pages of standard printer paper from her laptop, taped together like a puzzle. Logan looked at the blue line, then at her. He didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. "Martha knew," he said, his voice barely louder than the hum of the stove. "Her dad found it when he drilled the deep well back in 52. The water came up so cold it broke the pump. He capped it and told us to leave it alone. Said water is like blood, you start selling it, and the land dies from the inside out." "Arthur knows, Papa," Kinsley said. "I know he knows. That's why he sent Eleanor up here 3 years ago with that paper for me to sign. Said it was a family trust agreement, to protect the property from the state. I told her to take her city papers and put 'em where the sun don't shine. We need to pay the taxes today," Kinsley said. "I'm going to use my money." Logan looked up, his gray eyes suddenly sharp, almost fierce. "No, I ain't taking your money, Kinsley. You worked 5 years in that city cage to get that pile. You don't throw it into this dirt for an old man." "I'm not throwing it away," Kinsley said, leaning forward, her face turning into that granite wall her clients used to fear. "I'm investing it, but I'm not doing it as your granddaughter, Logan. I'm doing it as your partner." She pulled a document from her folder. It was a standard, ironclad partnership agreement she had drafted between 12 and 2 that morning, using her old corporate law templates. 51% for you, 49% for me, Kinsley said. My 49% is backed by the $18,000 to clear the debt, plus $5,000 for working capital. In return, I get full management authority over the commercial use of the property. No sale, no lease, no easement can be granted without my signature. Logan looked at the paper. He didn't read it. He looked at her hands, at the split knuckles, the short nails, the gray dirt under her thumb from the barn door. You really want this place, Kins? I don't want the place, Papa, she said, her voice dropping into a register that was completely devoid of emotion. I want the wall. I want a wall so high they can't even see the top of it with binoculars. Logan picked up the pen she had laid on the table. His hand shook slightly from the arthritis, but his signature was large, dark, and clear. Go down to the county seat, he said. Tell that girl at the treasurer's office that if she sees Arthur Sinclair's car in the square, she should call the game warden. Chapter 9. The Cross M Alliance. By May, the valley had changed. The gray muck had dried into a hard, golden loam, and the thistles were being replaced by the bright green spikes of new alfalfa. The old Ford tractor was running again, its new hydraulic cylinders gleaming with grease. Kinsley was in the north pasture, sitting on the metal seat of the tractor, pulling a harrow to break up the winter clods, when she saw Wade Miller riding his big bay gelding along the fence line. He didn't wave. He just sat there on his horse, watching her work until she finished the pass and brought the tractor to a idling halt near the gate. You look like you know what you're doing now, he said, leaning his hands on the saddle horn. I know how to grease a fitting, Kinsley said, cutting the engine. The silence fell over the field, sweet with the smell of turned earth. The steers look good, Wade. They gained 50 pounds a head over the winter. They did, he said. He reached down and patted the bay's neck, his eyes scanning the greening ridge. My dad wants to know if you're renewing the lease for the summer grazing. He'll give you $12 a head now that the fences are up. 14, Kinsley said, and I want 2 of your riders for 3 days in June to help me clear the willow brush out of the bottom ditch. It's backing up the overflow from the spring. Wade let out a dry, short laugh. 14, you're tougher than the old man ever was. The old man didn't have to pay off a bank line of credit, Kinsley said. Wade cleared his throat, his expression shifting from business to something more serious, something more hesitant than she'd ever seen in him. There's a dance down at the Grange Hall on Saturday. The volunteer fire department's raising money for a new truck. Kinsley looked at him. He was looking at his horse's ears. Are you asking me to go with you, Miller? I'm telling you there's a dance, he said, his jaw tightening slightly. And I don't like driving that road at night by myself. Too many deer. Kinsley smiled, not the polite smile she used for Eleanor, but a real, small curve that showed her teeth. I like dances, but I don't wear dresses anymore. My legs look like a map of the Civil War from the barbed wire. Nobody's looking at your legs, Wade said, turning his horse back toward the Cross M trail. They're looking at your tractor. Pick you up at 7. She watched him ride away, his shadow long against the new green grass. For the first time in 9 years, she felt like she wasn't running away from something. She was standing entirely still, and the world was moving around her exactly the way it was supposed to. Act 4. The 9-year silence. Chapter 10. The slow growth. Time in the high country didn't move in months or days, it moved in cuttings. The first cutting of hay was always late June, thin, sweet, heavy with clover. The second cutting was late August, thick, coarse, full of energy for the winter. By 2031, 4 years after she had walked out of her 25th birthday dinner, Kinsley Sinclair had forgotten the smell of Le Petit Chateau. She had forgotten the sound of her father's voice when he was trying to explain why Chloe's car insurance was more important than her dental bill. She had built a life out of 70-pound blocks of green alfalfa and the smell of horse sweat. The breeding barn wasn't empty anymore. Kinsley had used her remaining savings and the profit from 3 years of cross-M cattle leases to buy 2 registered quarter-horse mares from an estate in Montana. They weren't show horses. They were working stock, wide-backed, short-coupled animals with brains like tracking dogs and legs like iron pillars. In the spring of 2032, the first foal was born under her watch. It was a colt, a deep, blood-red bay with a white star between its eyes. Kinsley stayed up 36 hours in the straw, her head resting against Sadie's ribs, while the young mare struggled through her first delivery. Wade had come over at midnight, bringing a thermos of coffee and his long, quiet hands, helping her guide the foal's front feet out when the mare grew too exhausted to push. When the colt finally stood, its long, spider-like legs shaking as it reached for its mother's teat, Logan had stood at the stall gate, leaning on his hickory cane. He didn't say much. He was 83 now, his white hair long and wild under his hat, but he had reached into his pocket and handed Kinsley a piece of dried cedar. "Smudge the stall," he said. "Keep the spirits clean for the little bastard." They named the colt Blue Stem. By his second year, every rancher from Route 9 to the state line knew his name. He could turn on a dime, cut a steer out of a thick willow patch before the cowboy even saw the animal, and his disposition was as calm as an August morning. The Sinclair name had faded from the valley's mouth, replaced entirely by Kinsley of Blue Thistle. She had bought a new truck in 2033, not a dually like Wade's, but a white Ford F-150 with a simple V6 engine and a long bed that she kept loaded with fencing tools. She had paid cash. The title was in her name and Logan's. Her relationship with Wade had grown like the alfalfa, deep-rooted, slow, and completely unaffected by the surface weather. They didn't have an anniversary. They had the day the irrigation pipe burst in 2030, and they spent 12 hours in the mud together, and when they finished, he had driven her to the diner in town, bought her an open-face beef sandwich, and said, "I think we're going to be all right." They lived in their own houses. He at the Cross-M headquarters, she at Blue Thistle, but there was a path worn through the sagebrush between the two properties that was wide enough for a horse or a small tractor. Chapter 11. The Changing of the Guard. In October of 2034, the first real blow came. Logan didn't wake up for breakfast. Kinsley went into his room at 6, carrying his mug of black coffee with 2 spoons of sugar, and found him lying on his side, his face toward the window that looked out over the north pasture. He looked peaceful, his skin the color of old parchment, his bone-handled case knife sitting on the nightstand next to his watch. The funeral was small. There were 20 cowboys from the valley, the girl from the treasurer's office who had become a friend, and Wade's family. Eleanor and Arthur didn't come. Kinsley had sent a telegram to the suburban house. She didn't want to call, and received a short, formal letter from an attorney 2 weeks later stating that the Sinclair family extends their condolences and requests copies of all estate documentation to facilitate the resolution of any outstanding familial claims. Kinsley didn't send the documents. She filed the letter in the trash pile. After the funeral, Wade stayed with her in the kitchen. The geese wallpaper was gone now. Kinsley had scraped it off 3 years ago, replacing it with clean white paint and open cedar shelves she'd built herself. "You want me to stay tonight?" Wade asked, his large hand resting on the back of her neck, his fingers moving gently against her hair. "No," Kinsley said. She was sitting at the table, Logan's case knife in her hand, turning it over and over. "I need to do the books. It's November 1st. Kinsley." "I'm fine, Wade," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, even tone from 9 years ago. "I'm just calculating." He looked at her for a long second, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Don't count too long. The wind's coming up from the north tonight." When he was gone, Kinsley opened the desk. She didn't look at the bank balance, which was $62,000 now, the ranch completely out of debt and turning a profit of $15,000 a year from horse sales and grazing fees. She pulled out the partnership agreement from 9 years ago. Underneath it was Logan's will, which he had drawn up with the county attorney 3 days after they signed the partnership. It was 1 page long. Logan Vance, being of sound mind and tired bones, leave everything I own, including my 51% share of the Blue Thistle Ranch partnership, to my granddaughter, Kinsley Sinclair. She's the only one who ever knew what the dirt was for. To my daughter, Eleanor, I leave the old silver tea set in the hall closet. It's fake silver, which seems appropriate. Kinsley read it twice, then smiled. She put it back in the iron box, locked it, and went to bed. Chapter 12. The Storm on the Horizon. By the spring of 2035, Kinsley was 34 years old. Her face had changed. The soft, rounded lines of her 20s had vanished, replaced by a sharp, defined jawline and small, pale white crinkles around her eyes from looking into the sun. Her hair was longer now, usually worn in a single, thick braid down her back that reached her shoulder blades. She was standing in the breeding barn, checking Blue Stem's front shoes, when she heard the sound of two cars coming up the driveway. It wasn't the rumble of a ranch truck. It was the high-pitched, smooth whine of European engines. She let go of the colt's hoof, stood up, and wiped her hands on her jeans. Her heart gave a single, hard thud against her ribs, not from fear, but from recognition. She walked out of the barn into the bright May sunlight. Parked in front of the house were two vehicles. The first was a black BMW X7, its shiny paint covered in a thick layer of gray highway dust. The second was a silver Audi sedan. The door of the BMW opened, and Arthur Sinclair stepped out. He had aged, but not the way Logan had. He hadn't grown lean and hard, he had grown thick and soft. His hair was completely white now, combed back with expensive gel, and he wore a tailored blue blazer over a cashmere sweater, despite the 90-degree heat of the valley. He looked around the ranch with an expression of intense, professional distaste. From the passenger side stepped Eleanor. She looked like a ghost that had been preserved in vinegar. Her face was tight from what Kinsley recognized as several rounds of expensive cosmetic surgery, her hands covered in large, glittering rings that looked ridiculous against the rustic background. And from the back seat of the Audi stepped Chloe. Chloe was 31 now, but she still wore her hair in the same long, bleached blonde curls she'd had at 22. She was wearing a beige silk jumpsuit and high-heeled sandals that immediately sank 2 inches into the gravel driveway. "Oh, my God," Chloe gasped, looking at her shoes. "Mom, there's manure everywhere. This is disgusting." Kinsley didn't move from the barn door. She stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her leather tulle apron still tied around her waist. Arthur saw her first. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. He didn't see his daughter, the girl who used to balance his books and take his insults with a quiet nod. He saw a woman who was wider in the shoulders, darker in the skin, and whose eyes were as cold and gray as the limestone ridges behind her. "Kinsley," Arthur said, stepping forward. He didn't offer a hug. He didn't smile. He spoke like a CEO entering a boardroom after a long flight. "You haven't changed your phone number in 9 years. It made finding you very difficult." "That was the purpose," Kinsley said. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't carry any heat. It was just water running over stone. Eleanor let out a sharp, theatrical sob and took a step toward her. "Kinsley, my baby, look at you, you look like a peasant. What have you done to yourself?" "I've been working, Mom," Kinsley said. "Something you might have heard of, but never actually witnessed." Arthur's face flushed, that same purple hue Kinsley remembered from her 25th birthday. "That's enough of that. We didn't drive 3 hours through this godforsaken wasteland to exchange insults. We are here on business." "You don't have any business here, Arthur," Kinsley said. "We do," Arthur said, pulling a heavy leather briefcase from the back seat of the BMW. He laid it on the hood of the car, the dust sticking to the leather. "Your grandfather passed away 6 months ago. As his only surviving child, your mother is the sole heir to his estate. We have been very patient, Kinsley. We gave you time to mourn, and we gave you time to clear out your personal belongings. But the Denver Resort Group is closing their Q2 acquisitions next Friday, and we need the deed signed." Kinsley looked at Chloe. Her sister was looking at her with a strange, triumphant little smirk, The same smirk she'd had when she got the leather jacket after her fake panic attack. "You're going to get $1 million, Kins," Chloe said, her voice high and nasal. "Dad said we're setting up a trust for you so you can buy a nice little townhouse in the city. You won't have to live in this filth anymore." Kinsley let out a short, quiet laugh that made Arthur's hand tighten on his briefcase. "A townhouse," Kinsley said. "How generous." "It's more than fair," Arthur said, opening the briefcase and pulling out a thick, legal document bound in blue paper. "This is the voluntary partition and sale agreement. Eleanor has already signed as the primary beneficiary. We just need your signature to waive any occupational tenant rights you might have acquired during your stay here." Kinsley walked down the porch steps. She didn't look at the paper. She stopped 5 feet from her father. She smelled of cedar, horse sweat, and leather. He smelled of cologne and old paper. "Did you check the county records before you drove up here, Arthur?" she asked. Arthur frowned, his professional confidence flickering for a fraction of a second. "Of course I did. The tax lien was cleared in 2027. I assumed Logan paid it with some old insurance policy." "Logan didn't pay it," Kinsley said. "I paid it." "Well, we'll reimburse you for that out of the sale proceeds," Arthur said dismissively, waving his hand. "That's a minor accounting detail." "It isn't a detail," Kinsley said. She reached into her tulle apron, pulled out her phone, a modern one now, but still simple, and tapped the screen. "Wade, bring the truck down." From behind the north barn, the big silver Dodge Ram 3500 rumbled into view. It didn't stop next to the BMW, it parked sideways across the driveway, completely blocking the exit. Wade Miller got out. He didn't look at Arthur or Eleanor. He walked over to Kinsley, his long stride slow and heavy, and stood half a step behind her right shoulder. He had his hands in his pockets, his hat pulled low, his green-gray eyes fixed on Arthur's throat. "Who is this?" Arthur demanded, his voice rising in irritation. "Kinsley, what is the meaning of this theater?" "This is Wade Miller," Kinsley said. "He owns the Cross M. He also happens to be my neighbor and the co-signer on my commercial water development application." Arthur's face went entirely white. The paper in his hand rattled against the metal hood of the BMW. "Water development," he whispered. "The aquifer, Arthur," Kinsley said, her voice dropping into that terrifyingly quiet auditor's register. "The Class AAA aquifer that runs under my eastern ridge. The one you've been tracking since 2024. The one you told the Denver Resort Group you could deliver for $3 million. Act 5. The Valuation of Dignity. Chapter 13. The Single Document. Eleanor looked between her husband and her daughter, her brow furrowing through the Botox. "Arthur, what is she talking about? What aquifer? We're selling the land for a golf course. You said Chloe could get that condo in Aspen." "Shut up, Eleanor," Arthur snapped, his mask completely slipping now. He turned on Kinsley, his eyes wild with the specific rage of a gambler who had just realized the dealer was holding 5 aces. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think because you found some geological map you can hold up a multi-million-dollar corporate transaction? I am the executor of your mother's interests. Logan Vance died intestate. There was no will filed with the county clerk by the time of his death." "That's because the county clerk is only open on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Kinsley said calmly. "And I didn't see any reason to rush." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a single, clean sheet of paper. It wasn't the original. The original was in a safe deposit box in the bank town 20 miles away, but it was a certified copy with the state notary's raised seal visible in the lower right corner. She didn't hand it to him. She held it up so he could see the large, shaky signature at the bottom, Logan Vance. And above it, the partnership registration stamp from the state secretary's office, dated June 14, 2027. "This is the Blue Thistle Breeding and Agricultural Partnership Agreement," Kinsley said. Section 14, Clause C, in the event of the death of a primary partner, their shares do not revert to their estate or heirs at law. They are automatically offered to the surviving partner at book value of the partnership's net assets at the time of formation. Arthur grabbed the paper from her hand, his eyes scanning the lines with a frantic, desperate speed. His breath began to come in short, ragged wheezes, the exact same sound Chloe used to make in the dressing rooms. The book value in 2027, Kinsley continued, her voice as steady as the mountain range behind them, was negative $18,000 due to outstanding tax debt and frozen credit lines. I purchased Logan's 51% share from his estate 6 months ago for the sum of $1, as specified by the liquidation clause. This isn't legal, Arthur shouted, his hands shaking so hard the paper tore at the margin. This is a fraud. You took advantage of an old man with dementia. I'll sue you. I'll tie this property up in probate court for the next 10 years. You won't be able to sell a single blade of grass. Go ahead, Kinsley said. The county attorney was the one who drafted the will that accompanies this partnership. He's also the president of the local historical society and a cousin of Wade's father. He's very thorough. And Logan didn't have dementia, Arthur. He just didn't like you. Kinsley, Eleanor shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth. How can you do this to your family? Your sister needs this money. She's been so sick, her ears have been ringing since January, and the treatments are thousands of dollars a month. Kinsley looked at Chloe. The younger sister wasn't smirking anymore. Her face was pale, her mouth open, her silk jumpsuit looking cheap and wrinkled under the harsh mountain sun. The ringing in her ears is probably the sound of reality catching up with her, Kinsley said. She pulled her phone from her pocket, tapped the screen twice, and turned it around so Arthur could see the image. It was the screenshot from 9 years ago, the group chat where Chloe had planned her panic attack to cancel Kinsley's 25th birthday dinner. I've kept that picture for 3,285 days, Kinsley said. Not because I was angry, but because every time my back ached from hauling hay or my hands froze to the fence wire, I wanted to remember exactly what I was paying for. She stepped closer to Arthur, her eyes locked onto his until he actually took a step back, his heel hitting the bumper of his BMW. You told me that night to stop being selfish and think about this family, Kinsley whispered. So I did. I thought about how this family uses people until they are empty, and then throws them away. I thought about how you called me, the strong one, so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about giving everything to a girl who fakes illnesses to get leather jackets. She pointed to the road. Get off my ranch. Chapter 14, The Price of Leaving. Kinsley, please, Eleanor cried, reaching out to touch Kinsley's arm. Wade didn't move fast, but he moved effectively. He stepped between Eleanor and Kinsley, his huge frame completely cutting off the older woman's view of her daughter. He didn't say a word. He just looked down at her with that cool, green-gray gaze that had spent 30 years staring down 3,000-pound bulls. Eleanor shrank back, her expensive leather purse clicking against her belt. Arthur, do something. Arthur looked at the paper in his hand, then at the Dodge Ram blocking his driveway, then at Wade, and finally at Kinsley. The realization of what he had lost was written in the sudden, slack drop of his mouth. He hadn't just lost $3 million. He had lost his credibility with the Denver resort group. He had spent 9 years promising a piece of dirt he didn't own, using his wife's inheritance as collateral for loans he had taken out to keep his suburban house and Chloe's lifestyle afloat. You'll ruin us, Arthur said, his voice dropping from a shout to a low, gravelly rattle. The firm. I used the consulting fees from the resort group to pay off the bank for Chloe's townhouse. If this deal fails, they'll audit my trust accounts. Kinsley looked at him. She didn't feel a surge of joy. She didn't feel the sharp, hot rush of revenge. She felt nothing but a deep, clean emptiness, the same feeling she had when she looked at a spreadsheet that finally balanced to zero. You're an accountant, Arthur, Kinsley said. You've always been so good with numbers. Go figure it out. She turned her back on them and walked toward the house. Kinsley, Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, childish fury that sounded ridiculous in the wide mountain air. You're a monster. You've always hated me. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad loved me more. Kinsley stopped on the porch step. She didn't look back. They didn't love you more, Chloe, Kinsley said, her voice carrying over the wind. They just feared you less. There's a difference. She walked into the house and let the screen door click shut behind her. Chapter 15. The Clean Blue Line. The sound of the European engines roaring in reverse down the gravel driveway was loud, followed by the crunch of a fender hitting the stone cairn at the gate. Arthur had never been good at backing up trailers or big cars. Kinsley sat at the kitchen table. The case knife sat in front of her. Wade came back into the house 5 minutes later. He took off his hat, hung it on the wooden peg by the door, and walked over to the stove. He poured 2 mugs of coffee from the pot she'd made that morning, brought them to the table, and sat down across from her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew she was okay. The Audi's bumper is lying in the weeds by Route 9, Wade said, taking a sip of his coffee. I think your sister hit the iron horseshoe sign. Good, Kinsley said. It was hanging crooked anyway. They sat in silence for a long time, the afternoon sun moving across the clean white walls of the kitchen, highlighting the small, silver tracks of dust in the air. The state inspector's coming out on Tuesday for the final well certification, Wade said, his eyes resting on her hand where it lay near the knife. The bottling company out of Salt Lake sent over the initial contract draft. They're offering $200,000 a year for the extraction rights on the lower 10 acres, plus 5% royalties on every gallon. Kinsley looked out the window. In the pasture, the colt, Blue Stem, was running along the fence line, his tail high, his blood-red coat catching the light like a new copper coin. We'll take the $200,000, Kinsley said. But no royalties. Wade raised an eyebrow. Why not? The royalties could be worth another $100,000 if the brand takes off. Because royalties mean they have to measure every drop, Kinsley said, turning her gray eyes back to his. And like my grandmother said, you start measuring the blood, and the land dies from the inside out. We take what we need to keep the horses fed and the fences straight, Wade. The rest stays in the hill. Wade looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he reached across the table, took her hand, the hard, calloused, scarred hand of the woman who had built a wall entirely out of dirt, and pressed his thumb against her knuckles. Sounds like a plan, partner, he said. The grandfather clock in the Sinclair home 3 hours away was probably shuddering at that very moment, marking another hour of debt, desperation, and the loud, frantic noise of a family dissolving into its own lies. But at Blue Thistle, the only sound was the wind through the pines and the steady, quiet rhythm of a life built entirely on its own terms.